Now you can see my computer is a mess. It has so many things happening there. I'm going to open my IDE environment. So I am using Visual Studio 2019, okay, which is pretty good. It's very good. You can get it a community edition free of charge. I'll put it on the link on the description below from Microsoft. So let us create a new project. Okay, we are going to use everything stock just to create a stock project. So in this case, we are doing, what did we say? ASP.NET web application with .NET framework and Visual Basic as our language. So we're going to select that. We say next. Okay, we'll give this a name. We'll call this demo underscore. Remember, naming conventions. If you're a programmer, programmers do not like spaces, because that means two different statements, which things can get complicated in future. It's good practice to just always use an underscore in replacement for a space. Demo ERP, right? Save it in our default location. Now you can pick your .NET framework. This is so important again. When it comes to deployment, ASP.NET applications are deployed on something called IIS servers. You can Google that and read more on that. IIS servers are very sensitive. You could have people might have earlier versions of IIS or servers with earlier versions of Windows installed. So you have to really take time to look at backward compatibility. Okay, because this can present a major issue and actually can force you in some severe cases to rewrite your application layer, which is a nightmare. If you're on a budget, you can imagine paying developers to do that. If you're a developer, you can imagine regurgitating and redoing work you have already done. It's a lot of waste of time. Nobody likes it. Your developers will be mad, your clients will be mad because your budget will go up. In my case, I'm just gonna use everything default. So we create that. Okay, now you can see we have different kinds. We have the web forms, we have web API, we have single page application. I'll just briefly talk about some of these. So web forms is like ASPX. So if you just want a plain website, sort of like HTML but with a little bit more intelligence, you can use the web forms, whereby you can be able to store variables within your HTML and basically manage several types of data, or just to a certain extent you may be able to manage your data. Then we have MVC, model view controllers, which is much more advanced, which uses something called Razor technology, which is what we are going to use. So for model view controller, this separates your front end or your user front end to your logic. It separates basically your layout and your logic. So you can have a model whereby the data that is from your database is sent to the model or the structure of the data. Your view is what the aesthetics of what your user sees, and your controller is what controls the logic, like I want to create something. So there are different levels of logic. You could store part of your logic in the controller. You could also store part of the logic in stored procedures or triggers within the database, whereby you don't really need any interaction. Say for example, quantity. If you are in a shopping cart and the product is there, the quantity is there, you really don't need to put in the price. The system really doesn't even need to worry about the price. When you save the data, the database can actually just derive the total price from the quantity and the unit price you put in through the system. Then we have API, web API. This is like a RESTful API. So this is basically something that's an endpoint, whereby, say for example, Corona live updates. So you have a service that is constantly updating live data. You can have a web API such that when an application, it doesn't even have to be your application, it doesn't even have to be an MVC application, you can give another programmer in another world, in another environment, that API hook to hook on to data that he can pull from your database. So that's what we call a web API. Think about it like how can I say, our country code. For example, if I'm in Kenya and I want to call you in America, I don't just dial your number 07 blah 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 blah. I have put in the country code. That country code connects me to America's network and allows me to connect to your phone. So it's the same thing pretty much with an API. Then you have single page applications. There's Angular, JS, Node.js. There's so many things whereby your application looks like it's on one page, but it's actually manipulating through various aspects or various objects in just one experience. So for us, we stick to MVC. It gives us a lot more options on what to do. So we create the MVC project, demo ERP. Okay, so now I know this looks very intimidating. You can see all these things we've created and we say it's just disappeared like this. So we've created our application. Let's just look at what we have created. So we go to our solution explorer. I'll pin this so that you can see everything. Now you can see we have so many folders there. We have application data, app start, content, controllers, fonts, models, scripts, views. So this is the basic structure of our MVC application. Now in the initial stages, there are just two of the main places that we focus on. We focus on the controllers and we focus on the views. So you can see by default it gives us home shared for the views. It gives us a home controller. So let's have a look at what's in the home controller. The home controller just basically has a basic layout of a basic website: index, about, contact. So you obviously want a landing page where your users will be taken to, about us if they want, and contact. So this is where we are gonna put in some logic. So this is where we are gonna put in our account login logic and various other logics. You can now choose, you can have different controllers for different things. Like we're going to create a product controller and we are going to create a member controller, which basically holds things pertaining to those individual objects. So let's go to the views now. You know, the good thing with MVC as opposed to, you can see we have there VB.html is the extension. I'm sure many of you, by the time you're getting here, you're familiar. If you've ever opened a browser, you see something .html, home.html. This is the next level of HTML, and this is why we use model view controller, because HTML is called hypertext markup language, which just basically displays static text. So you can design something that looks very nice, but it's not very dynamic. So if Dennis is there, then you have to go into the source code of your entire website and put Dennis's image. Now that's not very practical, is it? So we have to have something that can manipulate, keep the basic structure like your avatar. You know, when you don't have a Facebook or a WhatsApp status profile picture, but it's sort of the provision for it is there. So we can have the structure, and then we can use something called HTML helpers. Yes, I'll come to that as we are continuing. HTML helpers basically will allow us to put Visual Basic logic that can allow us to take dynamic text or dynamic data and send that data, send those objects or pass those parameters onto logic functions in our controller. Okay, so in this case the extension is VB because VB is a language we are having. There's another one called C#. I also am good with C#, but I like VB because the code is very neat and it formats the language for you, because C# is very case sensitive. It has to be for programmers who are very you could say more advanced because they know exactly what they are doing. If you're a newbie and you're still trying to learn how to map different objects and whatnot, then it's just good to use VB. It's easier. You don't need to terminate your statements with full colons. It just basically looks easier to understand. So let's now go. Let's first test to make sure that our application is working. Okay, so by default, when you set it up, it configures everything for you. So let us run and see how it looks. Yeah. So you can see when you log in, we have by default Microsoft have tried, Visual Studio have tried, but I'm pretty sure there are many creative people out there who can design a much more beautiful interface than this. But this is basically a stock standard ASP.NET web application. So we've built our first application. You can actually even take this and host it on an IIS server and you have your website. So this is too static. We need to be able to change this data and do a lot of other things. So now that we've tested the application is working, we want now to move it from a static. Your application is basically a dummy. So think about it like a dummy with a lot of potential, like a newborn baby. It has no idea about anything. So now we take it to the next level, or now we go to kindergarten. Right, so there are several ways to do this. You can either create the objects within one application and whatnot, but the reason why we have MVC framework is it allows us to have multiple layers. This type of programming is called entire applications, or entire development, application development. This simply will allow you, if you have a guy who does database design, he can create his own project and create his own database. And if you have a UX and UI guy, he can create his own front end and create his own application, and then you can merge the two. You can add other layers like security layer, reporting layer. Maybe now there's also a guy who designs reports, who can pick various information from the database and from the application and manipulate them. So a full stack developer usually does all of the above, like me. So anyway, we're now going to create a data layer so that we can have access to our data. Let us go and create a data layer. So we add, now there are several ways. Traditionally, before Entity Framework made life so much easier for coders like me, we used to have to design the database like we've just done. Then we used to have to code the data, the objects, creating objects. That's called object-oriented programming. I'll put that on the links on the description below. So you would spend half of your product development stage, more than half, doing that. So in planning your product development cycle, it's important to put that in mind so that when you tell your client a certain deadline, they don't think that you're joking around with them and you're taking them around in circles. So we're very lucky to Microsoft looked at this problem, Visual Studio, and gave us a very powerful tool called Entity Framework. So Entity Framework will take our normalized projects, create a diagram out of it, and create classes which we can use to call the objects from the database. So let's create a new project here. We call this, we are going to, this is a data application. So we are going to look for, where is it? Object types. Let's look for this. Where is it? Creating it. It's a ASP. It's not. It's a class. It's a class library. Okay. Now, because because we can again, if you're working with many developers, okay, sometimes your code is your intellectual property, okay. You don't really want to know, or you want to protect your intellectual property but allow others to add on to it. Pretty much think about it like you want to open a screw. You don't manufacture the screwdriver and then open the screw. You go and buy your screw. Now there are different products from different companies with different screwdrivers, so you can go buy a screwdriver that's already been packaged by another company and use it for your application. So it's the same thing. You can package your different classes in class libraries, like say get member, and it will bring in data from instructions that have already been preset. So in this case, we are going to create a class library for .NET standard class library for Visual Basic. Okay, so let's create that because it's a library. Basically, your application layer is referencing a library where the objects are stored. Think about it like your kitchen and you're cooking and you have unga in the store, so that is your library. So you take the unga from there and you take it to where you are on the kitchen surface or on your door or on your sufuria and use it for whatever purpose you want to use it. So its naming conventions come here. Key, you can either choose whatever naming convention, but it's good to give it something that makes you understand exactly what you're doing. So we usually use business objects for business applications, or you can use data layer. So I'll call this data layer. Okay, so data layer, we create that. So you can see we have data layer. You can see there's a question mark there, dependencies and all that. Will come to that. So we have our data layer, we have an empty class there. Now traditionally we now used to go here, we create the member object, we create exactly what we've done in SQL, we recreate the same thing again here. So you can imagine all that work. It's a lot of work. So this used to make developers and clients come at loggerheads, because the client says, no, I want this thing in 3 months. You tell them, hey, no, I cannot finish in 3 months, because in 3 months I will still be writing the classes for. So we were given a very nice tool called entity framework. So let's add that here and see how fast this would have taken me. For a very short database we've created, this would have taken me a day or whatever, just an amount of time. See how you can do it in seconds. Let me save that. So now we add the entity framework. So we select a new item and add our entity framework model, which we have created. So this particular approach is called database first. Okay, so we've basically designed the database, normalized it, then we have created the objects. So you can do it the other way around, which is called code first. So you can code the objects. Say for example, if you're working very closely with a very pushy UX and UI design team, so you need to be very close to them. So your database guys can start with code first, create all the objects, then now go into the database and create the database from the code. So in our case, that's usually a bit more complex. It's better to do that when you've done a very good systems analysis, which is very detailed, such that when you encounter minute deviations along the way, you don't find yourself in a problem. So if you're developing an application that is going to continuously be growing, then you would want to start from the database, such that you can always update it and expand it as you add more features and functionality to your application, as well as enhance the performance of the application. So we are going to pick the ADO.NET entity data model. Okay, now we're going to call this business objects. Yeah, because this is where it's going to store the objects for our business, which is a member and a product. So business objects. Okay, so we create business objects. So now you can see we have some connection. It's asking you now, okay, so I am here to help you. Where do you want me to pick your structure? How do you want me to do it? So we are going to pick, I told you we have code first and database first. You can see here we can even have an empty model which we can update. We can have an empty code model which we can update. So in this case we are going from the database first. So we pick the database first. Then you can see here connection. Now this has given people, I've smashed in my software development life. I always have a backup keyboard because I usually smash them here. And let me tell you, this particular part called connection string could be could determine whether you will get a heart attack or not when you are at your client site deploying this. Yeah, you might find you've taken all that time to make a very nice application and then you can't log in, or you can't get it to work. It's similar like you've bought a nice car and you don't know where the keys are. You can imagine how much pressure that would be if you're in someone's parking lot. So you have to be very careful with this. Let's go to a new connection. Here I'm just going to pick my server properties. So you can pick this based on your server configuration. So let me pick based on my server configuration, my server instances and all that. You can Google connecting to SQL server instances for more information on this, which will just basically show you how to go about this authentication process. This is standard SQL authentication. It's good practice to always use SQL server authentication. Why? Because you can imagine if you're deploying somewhere like cloud where you do not have access to the physical computer or physical machine itself, you can have a huge nightmare connecting. Your application can fail to log in and the users can get a very nasty message when they try to log in, which can be quite embarrassing. Think about it like someone opening the door when you're in the shower. It's quite embarrassing. So anyway, let's use SQL authentication. Always good practice to do this. Now you can create the users and the users on the server that hosts your SQL application, the username and the password. So I've already done that. I'm using the default system administrator password. I will put my password. You can choose to save the password or not. I choose not to, so that in future when we are doing mass deployment, we can always change the credentials from a very small text file called a web config. That way we do not have to recompile the entire application and publish it to where we are, to the destination server that we are hosting the application. So always keep that in mind. Make sure that's an important thing to remember. So once you've got your authentication right, you'll see we created a demo ERP here, database. So we test the connection succeeded. That means the application can connect to the database for security purposes. This is very different from the system or the members table. This is security layer. There's a whole security layer aspect of this. The application, just like the user, enters the database the same way you enter your bedroom with a key. It's very private. The data is like someone in their personal space, in their bedroom. So you don't want just anybody to open your room and get inside. So you have to have authentication. So think of this as the key to your bedroom door. So that is what the system uses in order to access the objects that you have created. So we see, okay, demo ERP. So yes, exclude sensitive data from the connection string. That's if you're in a public environment like a mass hosting, like a hosting provider that's from a cloud online. If you're in your home server or your company's organization network server, then you can include sensitive information. This will only be seen by the system admins or people who have access to the IIS, the www.inet pub root folder where your application is running. So let's just leave sensitive information. Now you have to be very careful with the entity framework version. There's entity framework 5 and 6. Depending on how you want to code your controllers or how you have been trained as an application developer, Entity Framework 6 varies slightly from Entity Framework 5 in terms of the controller functions, such that the card operations. Card means create, update, delete, all those functions. The syntax of how that is sent to the model from the controller varies. So you have to be careful which one you pick, so that you don't have issues. We're gonna use 5 because I'm very familiar with 5. I'm not familiar with 6 that much, so we're going to use 5. Next, tables. So what do we want? Let's pick everything because we want just to see everything, but sometimes you could pick specific functions, specific tables, specific views. More to come on that on future videos later. So in just that very quick, how many seconds? This 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 seconds. In just 20 seconds, all that we have done in the database, we've created objects, we've normalized them, we've defined their structures, we've defined their attributes, we've done everything. All that we've just done has been mapped out in less than a minute. Okay, in less than a minute we have, and you remember we normalized the data, so we said one member can have many products. One product can have many members. You can see Entity Framework does this for you so well. You can just see it's magic. This would take developers months to actually get to this point, which would it basically would slow down your deployment. It would basically slow you down a lot, and that's where you would argue you'd find yourself at loggerheads with your client, because your client does not understand anything to do with database models, many-to-one relationships. All they want is to start creating members and products. So this saves you a lot of time, and it saves you a lot of fights and your reputation. So once we do that, we just build it, and there we have it. We are ready now to pick data from our objects in the database and present them to who? To the user. Okay, now we have done already. Now we have two layers. We have the data layer, we have the application layer. So the application layer still does not know. It needs to be told. The same way your friend has a number, a mobile number, but you take down their number so that when you need to call them in future, you simply open your phone book and navigate to their number. So we link the two layers by going to our application layer under references. We are going to add a reference, and we are going to reference projects. Data layer, there are so many things you can reference here. You can reference assemblies, you can reference communication projects. Say you're connecting a till that accepts payments from a cash register to something. You can reference the interface for that till. You can reference even the interface for a gun, for that matter, through these assemblies. So right now we are we are referencing our solution on the other side. So we've referenced that such that when we call our objects. They can be pulled exactly as we've designed them onto the application layer. So because we already created a member and products, I am not going to emphasize too much right now on the processes of those sign-up forms, but we're just going to do a very basic presentation. We are going to display on that home dashboard we've seen there, assuming we've logged in. We're just going to display a list of all the products and all the members so that you get the idea that all that information has come from the data layer. It's been normalized, it has come through a reference onto the application layer, and it has been presented onto your interface. Once you have that, that is the beginning of interacting with data from application layer to database. So let us create a table. Let us just go to the dashboard here. First, we start with the controller. The controller basically now will create the object. Say my name is Dennis. It will pick me. Think of it like an interface. So a check, and how can I say, like when you walk into it's like the delivery point. Let me just show it to you and you see how it looks. So we have different methods you can see here, functions that return data. So here we've created an index method, which basically it's a task that performs a certain action. Okay, so there are different tasks. This index is basically our home page, which is the dashboard. So there are two states of this index. There is the state of fetching data and there's the state of pushing data. Remember, we don't want static pages anymore. So we are able to create something like a new member, like John, and then take that new information as well and send it back. So we are not just pulling, we are also sending back. So those are categorized into get, HTTP get, and HTTP post functions. So for now, because we want to just bring in the data, represent the data, and show that we've actually gone to the database and brought out data that we created in the database, or data that is already existing, onto a new application. So we're just going to fetch the data. So in our index, there are various ways you can pass some parameters onto it. Say, for example, if you're passing information about a particular member, you need to pass their ID so that it goes to the database and looks for that particular member. But in this case, we are displaying a list of everything, so it doesn't matter. It should just display everything. So we need to define our model type. So before we do that, let's now call the reference to our object which we just created. So we use the imports functions. Imports. This also allows you to save a lot of time rather than having to call the full application layer part. So you just say imports data layer. Okay, dot data layer. That will have access to our objects. Then now we need to create the entities. The entities is now, okay, fine. Yes, we have access to the compound, but we are not in the house. We are in the compound. So now we need to access now the house so that we can access the various rooms. So we create the house. Now we just give it a new variable here. We just say dim db as since we already have our data layer dot entities. So that will bring a catalog of all the objects. Actually, we are supposed to declare it as a new. This basically means it's a new instance of all our objects. It's a catalog. A catalog is an instance of what's in a store. It's not the physical thing, but it's an instance, a representation of what is in the store, such that if you select this item, it will go to the store and get that item. So We create our DB there. We've decided to call our catalog DB. It's a database catalog. You can call it catalog, you can call it DB, you can call it DB catalog, whatever you want to call it. So we've called it DB. So that DB is, we actually change the declaration here from dimension to private. You can call it private, you can call it public if it is shared between different classes. In this case, we'll call it private because it's in the home controller only. Public is between other classes. Dimension is usually practical only when you're within a certain method inside a certain class. So here we'll just do private. Okay, so private. So now in our index, we need to return the model of what we are trying to display. Since we have several products, let's say we want to just display all the products in the store. Okay, so we create a products object, or we can create similar to the catalog but now for the product. Okay, so think about it like a sculpture of the product. So let's say dim product. This is a model. We are creating the product model. You can go further and create a separate model for this, which varies slightly from what is in the database depending on what you want to pick from the interface. But for now, let's keep it simple. Let's create a product model. So dim product, as we pick our catalog DB, as our product model. Product, our data layer dot products. Okay, there. So this is a model of our product, which is equals to, we need to assign it with something. So because we are picking all of them, it usually is a list. So we have to change the type here to dim product as list in brackets of, it's a list of, we want to display a list of products. So a list of products. So we've defined it's a list. So what do? We pick the list from the catalog, or rather now we pick the data. So because we have our catalog, we know where it is. We say db dot products dot to list. Okay, db dot products dot to list. Okay, so this basically will let us see. We need to install. You can see the good thing with Entity Framework is it gives you intelligence before you actually start calling these products. There are libraries that reference these products. You remember I told you about class libraries. Entity Framework is one of those libraries that come. So we are using Entity Framework. Someone created this class library, which made our work easy. So of course we have to honor them, we have to reference their work. So they've compiled it so that we don't have to manufacture the screwdriver and then open the screw. We just buy the package screw and reference it. So we add a reference to the Entity Framework. So once we do that, we shall be able to proceed. So let me just do that here. Entity Framework properties. Let's add the reference to that class library so that the system knows where it is getting that data from. So references, add reference, browse, paste it there, and voila, we have our Entity Framework. There we go. Intelligence. Now you see, most of us who started with Visual Basic 6, Visual Basic 6 has no intelligence and has no Entity Framework. So you would be referencing the objects from your strongly typed objects. So this, you would basically have a nightmare. This would probably even take you a week to figure out if you don't know where the problem was. So we've referenced that we've added that reference. So now the system knows what entity framework is on the application layer, and it's going to get all the products from that layer and put them in a list. So once we put it in a list, we have the products list now here, dim products. In fact, I should rename this to dim products list. Okay, so now we have a products list. We need to return this list to the view, which now contains all the data. So in our return view, we pass the product list, pass the product lists to the view, so that when the view picks it there, it's able to pick the collection of data that's in that list. So we've passed the product list onto the view. Now let's go to the view and see how we pick that collection. And we're going to put that collection in a table. We're going to create a loop that will add all the rows onto that table. Now this is where VB HTML comes in. This is the magic of VB HTML. So let's do that right now. Okay, so now we are at our dashboard. So I'm just gonna do something very basic. I'm just going to create a table that will humbly pick the data which we created. Because we've already created the data, we'll have on our other tutorials how to pass the same data we created from the application layer. In this case, we did it directly from the database, just so that we can show you how you can connect your data to your application layer and actually have access to send or receive data from it. So first thing we need to do, we were at the controller. We've created the controllers list. We've populated that list with the products catalog. We've returned that collection of data through a model, a view model. That's why we call it model view controller, MVC. So we've passed the collection to our view model, and now we go to our database and we retrieve the collection. So in order to retrieve the collection, we have to declare the model type. So we have to make sure that we know that this is a list of products that we are trying to retrieve. So the model type is important. If it was an individual product, the model type would be different. So in this case, it's a model type for this. Think about it like a parking space for a particular type of vehicle. So you have to be specific. You don't want to take a trailer into a small car's parking. So you have to define the parking lot first before you bring the trailer. So it has to be compatible. So this is the model type. So it's an IEnumerable. IEnumerable is usually a model type for a collection. Okay. Let's declare our collection there, which is data layer dot products. Okay, so this is a collection of our products. So with that said, we can now reference with our VB HTML the model. That way we can be able to create a table which will dynamically update itself with the rows. Now this is where your typical HTML guy would have just designed HTML, asked you how many members are there, and created individual rows for everyone manually. But we don't want to do that, because what if Dennis tomorrow is not the only one? What if Jack comes in tomorrow, or John comes in tomorrow, or the day after, or the day after, or the day after? You get the gist now. We don't want to always be editing that page. You can imagine if it's online, changing it and saving it again. You can imagine if 1 million people were to sign up to your website. You would write that down somewhere. Go, every time someone signs up, you open, you add them, you save, and then you upload the file again. If 1 million people did that, I guarantee you would not live for very long. So we create a loop to do that. So in this case, HTML allows us to do that by using HTML helpers, and that's why we use model view controller VB. So let's add some code onto our very nice HTML. So we will say the asterisk sign is the call sign or the implementer for the code that you're going to use, and you can see when you press enter, it has to be enclosed in a block. So we call this a code block. This is server-side code, so even if the user who is using the application tries to go and look at the code, they will never see this information. This information is filtered from the server, so they'll just see the plain nice HTML site that whoever designed your template or where you got your template came from. They'll just see that nice text that they did. So we've declared our call block. We're going to use a loop. Okay, so we have to create the table first. Now this is just typical HTML. Any HTML guru can do this. So I'm just gonna type it. I'm just gonna create the table, then we'll create a loop. So let's create the table. Again, once you're inside the code block, you have to use the @ sign. In C#, the symbol is slightly different, but it's the same. I think for C# it's the hash sign. You know, I haven't logged in C# in a long time. I'm on VB now, so VB, it's asterisk. I mean, it's at, sorry, not asterisk, but the @ sign. I'm not sure if that's asterisk or at, but the @ sign, like your email address at. So let's create our table. So we create our table. Let's create some column headers. So in our column headers, we're displaying products. So what were the attributes of the products? We have a product name. So we have this table header. Okay. What do we call this? Product name. Okay, so we have product name. Let's look at what else we can have here. Let's reference our object so that we just put in whatever we need to put in. Let me just open our product. So for products, we have product name, we have description and price. Okay, description, price. Okay, so we have the product name, product description, product price. Then that is static, so we don't need to change. Those are just our column headers. Then now we create our loop that will do what? Our loop that will create the rows. So for this, we declare a loop for each product. What is happening here? For each product in model. Okay, our model is an enumerable type. So yes, for each product, just do this. Okay, so we declare the loop inside here in our code block for each product in our model. You see, we've already defined the collection in our home controller. We've defined the collection and we've passed that collection onto the view model as products list. So the view model in this case, we've defined it as a list which is picking the products collection that have been passed from the home controller. So for each item in our model, we now create the rows. So tabular row, then the rest is now just HTML. Tabular row, so we create a row. Okay, inside the row we create our tabular data. Now we are mapping to the specific column headings. So we have our product name, so the tabular data there, we have our product name. Now we pick our name, because you remember ideally we would be doing what we are doing now 2 times for the 2 products we have, but in this case we only have to do it once. Then the system will replicate the same action for the number of products. So if you have 1,000,000 products, the system will do the rest for you. So tabular data, so we are picking what? Product name. So our product name is our model, is our product, which is our item in the loop. There's a very big difference, and this takes people a lot of time. You have your model, then you have your loop, which has the product item in the model. So we are on the sub layer, which is the product. So product dot name, so this shows you the name of that particular product at that position. So if it's in the first row, this is the first row. Second row, you get the gist. Okay, so we have product name, we have product name, we have description, and we have price. Okay, save. Now let us leave it at that for now. We've basically picked our data. No, we've basically designed our database. We've normalized the database, so the system knows the correlation between a product, a member, and products and members. We've brought that into the application through the data layer. We've referenced that data layer with using entity framework. We've fetched that data into a model we've created here for products, which simulates the actual product, and then we've passed that model onto a view and displayed the collection of the items in those models on a table. So let's just see, considering everything is right, this is at the point where the mechanic now turns the key and sees whether the vehicle will start. So if you have any errors here, you will not go anywhere. You will be told. So far we have no warning lights, and we are assuming we've gone through all the authentication processes because we have defined those. Now you can control those later, and there we go. As you can see, it never works on the first try. We see there our web config file is missing the entities. Now you can see why we like this. You see why MVC applications are easy to deploy. Your object library is a class library, but the connection, so different environments have different connections. So you might want to deploy it on your personal computer and your office computer, which the credentials are very different. So instead of redesigning the entire application with those login credentials, you just change a single line and it points to a new location. So in this case, let us pick our entities here in the application config where we know it can connect. So we pick our entity framework from the config, we pick our connection string. Now think of your vehicle and a key. Your car key is the equivalent to applications as a connection string. Okay, so you can have the same car but different keys work for different cars. So you can have, yes, a nice Mercedes-Benz S-Class, but your key will be different from John's key. So that is the same with the connection strings. We need to assign different keys to different applications of the different deployments of the same application. So let's put connection string in the web config on our application layer. Let's just find the correct place to put it. You have to be very careful where to put this, otherwise your application will never start. It's the same thing with a vehicle. So we are putting this inside. Let me just confirm. So we put this in the configuration section. Yes, in your config sections of your application. So we have picked that and put the connection strings. Okay, so sorry, not the config sections, I apologize for that. We take that, sorry, let me just get this. We take that and put it in the config section. Now make sure you do not mess this up, otherwise you will cry and you do not know why your application is not starting. Your customers will be very mad at you and you will not have any idea why life is being unfair. So we've put that in the config sections. Now it will find the entities. So if I was to change my server, I would just come to my business objects here and change the data source and change the orientation. Okay, so here goes. Let's try this one more time. Okay. Sorry, I copy pasted it onto the same location. You can see how programming becomes challenging when your mind now starts running. So I'm supposed to have put it in the configuration section of my application layer as well. So you have the business objects layer, which it is there, which I was copying from to actually put it in the application layer. So we put that as well in the application layer. And then now let us start the car and see if it starts. There, you see, you have it. There we are. We have connected our database to the application layer. We have picked the data from the database and we have displayed it onto a list on our free template. Now you can see where how important people who design templates come in handy. So this is the basic way you can represent data. Now how you choose to represent this data now on your template is up to your UX and UI designer. I'll have more tutorials on how to basic manipulate, but there's really no limit to what you can do with a template. The template is like being given ingredients and the raw spices, ingredients and raw food. How you cook it is really up to you. So I think that concludes my session today. I have basically shown you how to create a database object in your whichever database provider you use, whether it's Oracle, whether it's SQL, whether it's MySQL, whether it's MongoDB, whether it's there are so many different types of data. That is how you create objects and bring those objects onto the application layer. For the template we use in our website, courtesy of Richard there, he's our UX specialist. I'll show you a preview of his very nice templates. So that's where you can specialize, you can divide different tasks and be able to create web applications which not only just work but give the user a rich user experience which helps them perform tasks much faster, easier, and leaves them with a happier smile and a bigger check. Thank you. More to come. Subscribe to my channel.